everyone, it's Katie from Paradise Falls family. In this video and the next, we'll be taking you through our trip to Western Canada, including Vancouver, Victoria on Vancouver Island and Whistler. We actually did this trip around 2.5 years ago, but as we're currently between trips and really looking forward to our trip to Canada this summer, we thought we'd make a few videos talking through what we got up to. This trip was before we started this channel, so please forgive us for the iffy videos and footage. Hopefully we can still give you a really good guide and some tips from what was a brilliant family holiday. So we did this trip in October 2021. It was our first long haul trip post-COVID, and to be honest, while we'd always wanted to visit this part of the world, we always thought we'd do it in a few years alongside an Alaskan cruise like we're doing this summer. However, with the COVID restrictions still in place in a lot of places, our choices were a little bit limited and we decided we'd feel really comfortable in Canada and brought forward at least some of the trip we already had planned in our heads. With the kids only getting a week off school in October, we couldn't make this into a longer 2 or 3 week trip like we normally would, so we settled on 9 nights with 3 in Vancouver, 3 in Victoria on Vancouver Island and finally 3 in Whistler. With more time, we probably would have just given ourselves longer, particularly on Vancouver Island, but we found we had just enough time for the highlights and had a wonderful holiday. It's one we still look back on fondly now and was a major driver in us booking to visit Canada and Alaska this summer. As with any multi-destination trip, it took a lot of planning, so we'll talk you through what we did day by day and touch on some of the more practical bits and what went into our planning. I won't talk through the cost of flights and hotels too much in this video, as prices were really distorted coming straight out of the pandemic and have changed quite a bit since. But I'll try and give a bit of a guide around the activities as we go through. Our trip began with a drive down to Heathrow Airport. We took our time and arrived around tea time and checked into the Hilton Garden Inn Heathrow, right by the airport. We had no trouble parking at the hotel overnight, and then after checking out our room we had a lovely dinner in the hotel restaurant. We were so hyped up, the kids especially, but we settled in for the night and got a good night's sleep. The hotel itself was great, really comfortable. From memory, I think we had 2 double beds. We'd definitely stay here again, but the only downside was the next morning we had to move the car to the airport long stay parking lot before getting a shuttle to the airport. In our Heathrow stays since, we've always chosen a hotel with on-site parking for the whole trip to avoid messing around moving the car the next morning. The Sofitel is our favourite, but for longer trips we tend to use the Marriott Heathrow Windsor, which usually has some really good deals on room and parking. Our flight over to Vancouver with Air Canada was lovely, and we arrived in Vancouver buzzing with excitement. We'd booked a car for most of the trip, but to shave a bit off the cost we weren't picking this up immediately, so we jumped in a taxi into the city. We were staying at the Fairmont waterfront, having got a great deal with it being shoulder season and still post-pandemic. This is located right down by the water and the cruise terminal, and it's in a great spot in the city centre. We absolutely loved this hotel and still consider it one of the best we've stayed in. The communal areas and the staff were exceptional. We had great service and there's a lovely feel to this hotel. We got an upgrade to a harbour view room and had brilliant views across the water where we could watch seaplanes taking off and landing. The room was nice and big, it had loads of room with 2 big double beds and a really nice bathroom, and we were all really comfortable here. We'd highly recommend this hotel and would definitely stay here again, although unfortunately the price had gone up so we couldn't make it work for this summer. In terms of accommodation in Vancouver, there's obviously loads of options. With it being a while since we travelled properly and with prices being lower than usual, we wanted to stay somewhere really nice. We'd narrowed it down to the 2 Fairmont hotels and the Pan Pacific. We opted for the waterfront, but the other 2 would have both been brilliant as well, and we're actually staying at the Pan Pacific, which is also on the waterfront this summer. The main Fairmont Vancouver hotel is a little more central to downtown Vancouver, but all 3 are great locations with the city centre being so walkable. There's loads more options along the waterfront and back into downtown, suiting different budgets, so it's a really great city to visit. Back to our trip, with the time difference and jet lag we were all exhausted, so we chilled out in our lovely room, settled for a few snacks and then got some sleep to be ready for our first day in Vancouver. The next morning, of course, we were awake ridiculously early, but we used this as an opportunity to get in some pool time. I think it opened at 6 AM and was outdoors but heated. With it being October, it was chilly and dark, but it was brilliant having the heated pool to ourselves on the rooftop, and we have some really lovely memories from this time. After getting dry and warm, we headed out for the day, stopping for breakfast at the food court in the Waterfront Centre, a shopping centre attached to the hotel. Then we made the short walk to the Waterfront Sea Bus Terminal just down the road. Rather than do a more expensive harbour tour, we decided we'd hop across the bay on the commuter ferry for a fraction of the price. It dropped us at Longsdale Quay, where there is a little shopping centre. In peak season and nice weather, we can imagine it being lovely, but first thing on a cold October morning, it wasn't that appealing, so we headed back fairly quickly, enjoying watching the seaplanes fly overhead and land on the water nearby. Our next stop was Stanley Park, which is a must-do in Vancouver, so we hopped in a taxi up to Spokes Bicycle Rentals on the edge of the park. One of the top things to do in Vancouver is to cycle the seawall around the park, so we rented some bikes for a few hours and started off. Spokes were fantastic, with loads of availability, and they were really helpful getting us set up with the right bikes for the kids. It was really handy being so close to the park, and they offer rentals starting by the hour and going up to multi-day hire. We're planning to rent some bikes again this summer, and we'll definitely use Spokes again. To give you a rough idea on pricing, a half-day rental is $36 per adult or $24 for a junior bike. The path around the park is lovely. It's level and wide and very safe for families to cycle. It's supposed to take around an hour and a half to do the whole park, and it's really scenic with the park on your left and the water on the right as you go around anti-clockwise. There are lots of nice stop-offs along the way, and we made sure to stop and see the famous totem poles, and also spent some time at a playground that we spotted along the way. After an hour or so, we'd made it about a third of the way around with all of the stops, and the kids, still being fairly little, weren't really up for going any further, so we decided not to push them and took the opportunity to cut back across the park. It was a shame we didn't make it the full way around, but the kids were young, and we're hoping to try this again this summer. The park is a lovely place to spend the day, with loads more on offer, including an aquarium, beaches, and a little train to ride, although that was shut when we were there. From here, our next stop was Granville, out on the outskirts of the city. We were aiming for a store called Indigo, which is a Canadian bookstore, but it also sells toys and games, and in our case, most importantly, it had an American Girl dolls section. We'd wanted to take Eva here for years, and we were worried we'd missed our chance as the US borders were still closed, but fortunately there was one located here, so we made the trip out in a taxi to do some shopping. Indigo is located on Granville Street, and this is a great area to do some shopping. We were able to pick up some bits and absolutely fell in love with Indigo, definitely our new favourite shop in Canada. Afterwards we popped in Tim Hortons for some sandwiches for lunch, and then we walked down to Granville Island, which was around a 10 to 15 minute walk away. Granville Island is a really lovely spot, with an indoor market and a little water park, although this was closed at this time of year. There's lots of fun shops, including toy shops and sweet shops, and it's a nice place to spend some time and pick up some treats. Outside we were able to hop on the False Creek ferry, which took us across the bay to the Olympic Village. These ferries are fun little taxi ferries that dot around the False Creek Inlet between the village and Granville Island, so it's a fun way to get around. The Olympic Village itself has been converted into condos and restaurants, so there's not really a lot to see here now, although it is really close to the Science Museum, which stands out like the Epcot golf ball. We decided against visiting here as we still wanted to see more of the city, so we jumped back in a taxi back towards the hotel. With maybe half the afternoon left, we decided to head out onto Canada Place, right by our hotel. This is an impressive looking building, home to hotels, the cruise terminal, and also the Flyover Canada attraction. We hadn't done any of these before, but it turned out to be really similar to soaring at Epcot in Walt Disney World. It was an 8-minute 3D flight over the sights of Canada. We all really enjoyed it, and it's a great option if the weather isn't playing ball. We must have liked it, as we then did the Flyover Iceland attraction last year in Reykjavik. Looking at the website, pricing now is around $29 per adult or $19 per child, so fairly reasonable and a really fun option for families. Another big reason we chose to visit Vancouver was that we have friends who live here now, so we're really looking forward to catching up. We had plans for dinner with friends that evening, but had a bit of time to kill still, so we decided on our way to take a detour through the Pacific Centre Mall, right in the middle of downtown Vancouver. This is a massive indoor mall with loads on offer. We made sure to stop in Purdy's Chocolates for some treats, and Bath & Body Works of course, and then headed to White Spot just a short walk away on Dunsmuir. We had a lovely meal catching up with some old friends, and then had to head back for some rest as we were all exhausted with jet lag and a really full-on first day. The next morning we woke up really early again, so more pool time, and it was loads of fun. We really like making use of the pool when it's quiet, either early in the morning or late at night. Today was the day we were picking up our rental car. This was through Alamo, who we always tend to use. They always have a good range of cars for decent prices and very clear packages and inclusions with no hidden costs. Our pickup point was Vancouver Airport, but it was still early, so we had a quick breakfast in the shopping centre food court again and went for a walk down to Gastown, which was an area nearby the hotel. This is a lovely old area of the city centred around Maple Tree Square with lots of restaurants and shops, as well as the Gassy Jack statue and the steam clock on Water Street. This has a steam whistle that goes off every 15 minutes. It's a really atmospheric area of the city, and I think we'll try and come back here for a meal this summer. After a nice walk around, we jumped in a taxi to the airport, picked up our car, an intermediate SUV, which is always our go-to to fit the 4 of us plus luggage, and then we headed back to the city. It would have been cheaper and probably easier to use the SkyTrain to get out here, but we were trying to be careful post-pandemic. You'll have noticed that we use taxis to get around, which sometimes can be cheaper or easier travelling with the 4 of us, but Vancouver has great public transport options that I'm sure we'll make more use of next time we visit. On our way back to the city, we stopped off at Queen Elizabeth Park for a wander around. This was a nice little stop, mainly because we'd heard there were amazing views back to the city. However, it was a really overcast and dreary day, so we couldn't see a lot, and it wasn't great park weather, so after a quick walk around the lovely grounds we moved on. On a sunny day, I can imagine it would be a lovely place to spend some more time. Our main plan for the rest of the day was to visit Capilano Suspension Bridge Park, which is north of the city over the bay. The route takes you directly through Stanley Park and over the Lions Gate Bridge, which is a massive suspension bridge, much like the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. We decided on the way to make a stop in the park for lunch, and specifically we went to Stanley Park Brewing Restaurant. This was a lovely restaurant with great food, loads of options and a reasonable price too. There's parking just outside, so it was a really easy stop, and then we had a quick walk to the Sepperley Park playground nearby and Second Beach. Moving on, we drove over the bridge and made the short drive north to Capilano Suspension Bridge. Usually there are shuttle buses that run from the city centre to and from Capilano. However, these weren't yet up and running post-pandemic, so it worked well for us having a car. At Capilano, the main attraction here is of course the suspension bridge, which is brilliant if a little unnerving when you step out onto it and it's bouncing around, but you really quickly get used to it. There are brilliant views in all directions, a roaring river underneath, and we saw a couple of eagles while we were here as well, which were really cool to see. On the other side of the river is the Treetops Adventure, a series of platforms, walkways and bridges up in the trees that we had a great time exploring, with the kids filling in an activity book as they went along. There's also the cliff walk, a nerve-wracking walk on a narrow walkway off the side of a cliff above the canyon. It's all perfectly safe and it was a really thrilling thing that we all enjoyed. In the summer you can meet birds of prey at Raptors Ridge, but this wasn't available when we visited. Finally, the Visitors Centre has information on the history of the park. There are talks available and guides with a brilliant shop where we picked up all our souvenirs. We also had time to stop and warm up with a hot chocolate, which was lovely. It was definitely one of our highlights of the trip and must do if you're in Vancouver, and we're hoping we can squeeze in another visit this summer to see it in a different season. Back in the city, it was time for dinner, and again we met up with another old friend. This time at the top of Vancouver Revolving Restaurant. This is in the same tower as the Vancouver Lookout, which was closed when we visited. But regardless, you can save yourself the entry fee and come up for a meal instead. It's a lovely place to eat with amazing views across the city as you very slowly rotate around. The food was great, and although it's a little bit pricey, but if you tot up the cost of entry plus what a normal meal would cost you, it was really reasonable to do it this way, so it's definitely worth checking out. The next morning we unfortunately didn't have time for our daily swim as we needed to get on the road down to Tawasin Ferry Terminal, just south of the city, to take us to Vancouver Island. We did have time for a really quick walk around the harbour area though to see the Olympic cauldron and the Orca statue and to get some last pictures. The hotel has a car park underneath the hotel which was around $55 a night. It's not that unreasonable and we've definitely seen worse for a city centre hotel car park. Parking so close meant it was dead easy to pack up and get on our way. We were sad to be leaving the Fairmont after a wonderful stay, but we were really excited to get over to Vancouver Island, and I'll talk more about this and the rest of our trip in the next video. Before we finish though, just a note on a few things that we didn't have time for or couldn't do. The main one for us was Grouse Mountain. Again, this is north of the city, not far from Capilano. Grouse Mountain includes a gondola up to the top of the mountain where there are numerous attractions including the chance to see grizzly bears, a lumberjack show and treetop adventures among other things. It looks a brilliant day out, but unfortunately it was shut while we were there, which was really disappointing. During the winter it has skiing and snowboarding, so they close for a few weeks to gear up and change over to the winter activities. Unfortunately for us, visiting between seasons, it meant we couldn't visit this, so this is our number one thing that we would like to do when we go back to Vancouver this summer. Elsewhere, you've got Cypress Mountain, which sounds similar to Grouse Mountain, but has a mountain coaster and axe throwing too, so that's another one we're looking at for our next visit, as again it was closed when we were there this time. Then there's Lynn Canyon Park, which sounds similar to Capilano but less crowded, and the H.R. Macmillan Space Centre, which again sounded cool, but we just didn't have time. As well as all of this, you've also got the option of a whale watching excursion. This is something we really wanted to do to try and see orcas, but we booked it out of Victoria instead, as this is where all the tours head to anyway. So with all of this on offer, and in better weather with everything open and available, we could have easily spent a few more days here. As you've probably noticed, October wasn't the best time to visit, with the weather being a bit iffy and a lot of things closed or on a reduced offering. For such an outdoors city, I think it does make a big difference here, perhaps more than other cities that we visited before. Despite this though, we still did have a wonderful time and really loved this city, so we're really looking forward to getting back this summer when we can see it at its best. So that brings me to the end of this video and our time in Vancouver. In the next video, I'll cover the rest of our trip on Vancouver Island and Whistler, where we had an amazing time. We hope this overview was useful for your trip, and if you've got any questions or any other tips, then just please let us know in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more of the trips, and we've got loads more coming up, including our Canada trip this summer. Thank you all so much for watching.